Welcome to another edition of 1 in 15. As ever, I'll get my guests to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Andy, and thanks for the opportunity. My name is Christophe Bagnoud, and I am originally from Switzerland, but moved to Brazil about 2 years ago to do what I'm passionate about, which is coaching, executive and performance coaching. And I would like to talk to you about my experience in risk-taking.
That's brilliant. So it's great to have you, Christophe, and I think you definitely win the prize for being physically the person who's furthest away as I've done one of these interviews. As you know, the context of this is that one big thing. You've kind of introduced that theme already, but what is that one big thing that's been dominating your mind, and how are we going to talk about it today?
I would say it's about really probably finding out what it is you really want to do, and then find a way to do it.
Okay.
So I know it sounds very cliche, but it's not that easy.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about how that has been a lived reality for you over the last few years.
So I used to work in a corporate world where in HR, worked in about 30 different countries. I was well on my way to become a VP and very safe environment in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. But something was missing. I started working with a coach privately, and I realized that what I was doing that I really liked was about 10% of my time.
Okay.
And that was really to work with people, to help them develop and reach their full potential, which is, in terms of my HR world, was about 10% of my time. So then towards the fact that I was reaching 50 and realized that time was not expendable. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, how can I make those 10% 100%?
Yeah.
And that's how it all started from the professional point of view. From the private point of view, I used to live in Brazil a few years ago on an expat assignment, and then I really loved the country, mm-hmm. loved the weather especially, I loved kite surfing, the people, and I realized what would prevent me from actually being a coach working from Brazil with clients all around the world.
Excellent. So that's interesting. So that you use that phrase, moving that 10% to 100%. That feels like a big transition. That feels like a big jump. Did you do that in one go? Have you got there yet?
I don't think I'll ever get fully there, mainly because Brazil couldn't be more different than Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And every day I'm learning, I'm being challenged positively, sometimes negatively, but that helps with my resilience. So I will never be Brazilian, but I will always be gringo, as they say.
Sure.
But I'm totally okay with that. I think what was difficult at the beginning was to deal with the administration, which is quite heavy here. Mm-hmm. And on the professional side, it was really to convince people that the fact that I'm based in Brazil most of the year doesn't mean that I cannot do serious work as a coach.
Sure.
And but somehow it's interesting because, at least for me, if one thing has changed positively with the COVID, is that this is becoming much more common. So now when I tell clients in Switzerland or elsewhere in the world, I'm based in Brazil, I do home office here, it's much more accepted than 1 year ago.
Yeah. So is that's part of that transition from 10 to 100% is how you work as well as physically where you're working. Is that true?
Yes, it is. It is, and it's the realization that really it's not, I mean, the fact that you're doing what you like, even if it's not 100%, because it's tough to start a business, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Especially in this current environment now. But the driver is really to wake up every morning knowing that you're doing what you really like.
Yeah.
And it's also need to be a shift of perspective, going from I mean, from a risk-taking point of view, going from what is the worst situation and how would I be able to deal with it, to what's the best situation and what will it be like to live with it. Coming from Europe, I think we insured for pretty much everything that can happen in our lives. We have insurance for everything. We always kind of try to protect what we have, but we tend to forget that there's a whole world out there. And what if we stop worrying, losing what we have, and focus on what it could be, what it could become? I think that shift of perspective was difficult.
Yeah. So that's really intrigues me. Like how, because I'm sure anyone listening has been there or maybe is there, that the anxiety that can be generated when you recognizing that where you are, what you're doing isn't what you want to do, that can be quite an anxious place, because taking that risk, or I guess even working out what that risk might be or what it might involve, can feel quite paralyzing. So tell me a little bit more about how you managed to work out what those risks were, and then how you got the courage or forced yourself to take them.
I would say that I put those risks into the larger perspective of life, and I've always been thinking about my last day on Earth, and what would it be like to look back at my life and to think, oh, I've got so many regrets. I should have done that and that and that and that. And I will have regrets, of course.
Of course,
nobody can lead a perfect life. But it would be great if those regrets could be, somehow smaller regrets than huge regrets. So I think the shift of going from the everyday what if not, to a larger perspective of let's look at it in the timeline of my life, and what do I want to achieve ultimately, is really helping.
Yeah. And for you, kind of approaching 50 was a catalyst for that, I guess, because if you look at the timeline, you're that little bit nearer the end than you might comfortably want to be, wherever the end will be, and hopefully it's a long, long way away. I guess I'm really conscious that some of us who've made those kind of decisions because our physical age has been a factor, one of the regrets, ironically, we might have is that we hadn't made that decision 10 or 20 years earlier. So have you dealt with any of that kind of side of things?
Yes, the trigger was the realization that time is limited, and you don't think of that when you're in your 20s, 30s, no. And to take time for self-reflection. As I said, I worked with a coach for a few months, and to make that space to think about your life, which is really the first step, and then to start thinking, what is it I really want to do? And that's not easy.
Yeah,
that's not easy at all. But I realized, funnily enough, that what I wanted to do were things that I already knew as a child. Isn't that strange? Or as a teenager, when we had all those dreams, and somehow I already knew that they were always there, those dreams, but we put on so many filters years after years, and protection and whatever, and we have to look behind them to go back to our I would say innocent side, and listen to it.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, because again, I'm sure anyone else listening is doing the same thing. I'm thinking about decisions that I've made, and actually some decisions that perhaps I've not made, and how I've kind of framed that. And it reminds me a bit of I've been a youth worker a lot of my career, and we used to have to deal with risk assessments, for activities that we would do. And some people were really twitchy about that, because they thought that the purpose of a risk assessment was to keep everyone completely safe, to rule out the chance of anything bad ever happening. And I used to have to say to those people, no, it's not that. It's about recognizing where the risks are and working out which are the risks that are worth taking. Which are the risks that are worth taking. Some of them, if the result was, this is definitely going to result in injury or death, and it's almost certainly going to happen, then not to do it. Absolutely not to do it. But I guess in life, some of those things might be, if you're thinking of somebody like yourself who's gone, maybe 10% of what I do is what I want to do, is the stuff that gives me life and energy and makes me feel human. The risk of carrying on and not changing might actually have a bigger cost than the risk of taking the risk to move, to do those radical decisions that you've done or that felt radical at the time. And so it's weighing that up, isn't it? You know, what is the risk of getting to the end of our life full of regret for the things that we didn't do, might actually be a worse place to be. And so that actually that begins to mitigate the risks, the small risks or the bigger risks that we take. You know, taking a chance. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, but at least I've got a story to tell, you know, or at least I've got these resources that I can draw on. Does that ring true?
Yes, no, absolutely, Andy. And also, you know, because if you don't take the risk, you would never know.
Yeah.
There's only one way to know. And of course, risks need to be calculated, and you wouldn't move countries or move career without thinking carefully about it. And it took me probably about 2 years to put that project together.
Sure.
So risk need to be calculated. But in the risk assessment part, what I think we often forget is we always talk about the benefits and the risks, but what about what could go right? What about the dreaming part? What about what it could bring to me? So I think that should also be put in the balance.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I mean, we've got maybe three minutes left of the timer. I'm really conscious that you know, if somebody's sitting there and they're thinking that they've got a parallel story to where you were a few years ago, they're conscious that they want to change something about who they are or what they do. Maybe they're not quite sure what that is yet. What do you think are some of the first steps that they can take to recognize what it is that they might be able to do?
Self-reflection. Mm-hmm. Just stop, take time to think. And some people can think by themselves. Some people need to have thought-provoking discussions, or need to talk to a friend or to a mentor, to coach, to a boss, to a family member. But to make that time is the first step.
Yeah.
The first step. And then the second step is don't let difficulties paralyze you. The fear of losing what you have can be really, really big. And people around us, you know, many people around me were trying to prevent me to do this, and that was coming from a good place.
Yeah.
But the pressure of the environment is very important too.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to people around you. You should, but you know, never let them take your dream.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, I love that the important, I mean, obviously we're both coaches, we're a bit biased here, but obviously that the importance of self-reflection, of stopping, listening to your inner voice, maybe asking people for their input and weighing up. I think it's a bit like a risk assessment, actually. The advice we get from other people, we hold in a place of assessment, don't we? You know, people, as you say, often advise us to play safe because they care about us, because they want us to be safe and they don't want us to take the risk. But if we can convince ourselves and we can convince some people that we have thought it through, that we've weighed up the pros and the cons, we've weighed up the risk of not doing anything against the risk of doing something, and we can't guarantee what's going to happen. You know, any step we take is a bit of a risk in itself, isn't it? But if we can go, well, I've thought it through, and sometimes coming to the end of that thought through is to stay in the same place, is to stay doing the same stuff, but you've got a new understanding of why it's important to you, or you've got a new appreciation of the bits that are valuable. And sometimes it's making a subtle change, and sometimes it's upping sticks, going to the other side of the world as you've done, and changing career as you've done. And I'm sure people have taken even more wild risks that have carried off as well. So if somebody's done that self-reflection, they've started to go, right, I've got this area of my life that's being unfulfilled in some way. I've spent that, I've weighed it up with the advice of other people. I know there's a risky first step I want to take, but I'm paralyzed at the moment. I don't seem to be able to do it. Is there any advice you can give them about how they might be able to take that first step?
Precisely by taking a step at a time.
Yeah.
And it's a big thing to change your life. Never always keep the end in sight. You know, what will it be like, and how will I feel, and try to picture the situation, try to feel what it would be like. Don't let that passion, that motivation die. And you know what is what's the cherry on the cake is really? Is that once you've actually done it and you're looking back and you realize that what you're doing on top of making you happy is actually inspiring people.
Yeah.
That's really one of the best parts of it.
Yeah.
So by living your dream, you not only make it come true, but you're also inspiring other people, and that's really important.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually a really good place for us to kind of end with, in a way, because it's that thing of that we admire risk takers, we admire the daredevils, we admire the people who understand that they might lose everything, but it's more important to try than to not try. And also what you've done, and people like you, Christophe, have done, is you've given those of us who are worried, who've built up a load of evidence about why staying the same is the safest, the wisest thing to do, but knowing deep in ourselves that that's making us unhappy, or it's disconnecting us from ourselves in some way, you give us evidence that it might be possible. And that's that thing, that's that inspiration. It might be possible. And if Christophe can move from Switzerland to Brazil, can move from a career in HR to a career in coaching, and everything that entails, then maybe my dream is also possible. Sure, it's the result. Every journey is all the 1,000 steps that make it up, but actually maybe it's possible as well. Christophe, I know there's loads more to your story. I'm really intrigued, and with all of these interviews, I'm thinking about loads of stuff. I'm conscious of where I'm stopping myself from taking risks and so on, but we have run out of time. So thank you very much for your time today. Bless you.
Thank you, Andy. Bye.